It's comments like this that inspires me to talk about lifted vans. Weldtec gets all the social media hype. Not many people know about action van suspension. So I just want to spread awareness to the product because there's an alternative to Weldtec. My first van build was lifted 10 years ago. The only choices for a two-wheel drive lift kit was Camberg and action van suspension. I went with action van suspension because of the price. It was $1,900 10 years ago. In 2023 it's $2,089. So when I got this van build, I did research on lift kits again. I believe Weldtec started about 6 or 7 years ago, so I decided to give Weldtec a chance. Since I am a big fan of vans, especially lifted vans, I did a lot of research and I was noticing a lot of it's Weldtec or nothing. Weldtec all day, every day. Weldtec hands down by far. I was seeing a lot of those in forums. Weldtec built up a lot of hype and a lot of people are convinced Weldtec is the only way to go. I had to save up for a year and work overtime hours to afford my Weldtec lift. So for 1 year, I was Weldtec or nothing. I was the nothing part for a year. Had to drive my van stock height for a year, and it was lame because my previous van build was lifted and I drove that van lifted for like 6 years. So driving stock height for a year felt really lame. You know, I have something I could sleep in. Like if I go on a long road trip, it's perfect. That's why I have it lifted for desert runs. It's kind of like a poor man's sports mobile van. Action van suspension. We make it cool to drive a van again. Give us a call or just drop by and see us today. We look forward to lifting your spirits and your van. My buddy Sebastian's Life 91 just got an action van lift kit installed on his van. Hey, Sebastian's Life 91, leave it in the comments. Are your spirits lifted along with your van?
There's the new shocks, there's the new coils, Bilsteins all around. Radius on. Here on the back we did a set of Bilsteins all around. See them right there. Got the nice rock lights, 265, 75 16s. Let me put you on the floor. That's the floor.
This is my second van build with the lift. My first van build was lifted with an action van suspension. This current van build is lifted with the Weldtec. Weldtec designs. And then Weldtec achieves their lift with bending the I-beams combined with taller coil springs. More on that later. When I was doing research for my second van build, my second lift kit, I was watching a bunch of Weldtec videos and reading a bunch of topics about Weldtec on the forums, and all the hype that Weldtec was getting. I was expecting this lift kit to just be way better than action van suspension in quality and performance. That's not the case. Action van suspension and Weldtec have different styles for lifting these vans. Action van has been doing it for 25 plus years. Weldtec has been around for 6 or 7, I believe, lifting these vans. And to defend both companies, I've never heard of a report, never read anything, never watched a video about an action van suspension drop down bracket bending, cracking, or breaking, and I haven't seen a report of a Weldtec bent I-beam snapping in half. I haven't heard any reports of any catastrophic failures from either company, so I trust both companies. A lot of people that I chat with on YouTube, in the comment section, and Instagram through the messenger are a lot like me. Money doesn't grow on trees. So for me, I was Weldtec or nothing. Had nothing, no lift for a year, saving up for the Weldtec. So if you're tired of having nothing and you want a more affordable product that's comparable quality and your mind is open to action van, let's take a look at some prices here. If you're in the East Coast, this is what a Weldtec kit is going to cost you out of pocket. So this $500 is refundable when you send back your stock I-beams. That's the core charge. So add $600 to this for the shipping, about $4,600 out of pocket for a Weldtec lift shipped to the East Coast. To me, this is what the lifted van community is all about, especially for people wanting to get into this hobby. So thank you for the heads up on what Action Van charges for shipping prices. This is to Pennsylvania to the East Coast. Here's what the Action Van base kit is going to cost you, $20.89. Let's do some math. $20.89 plus $175. That $175 is for the core charge for the radius arm. You'll get your $175 back when you ship out your stock radius arm back to Action Van. So that comes out to $22.64. Let's add $200 for the tax. I'm rounding up. It's going to be cheaper for the tax, but it's always good to round up. So it's going to be cheaper when you do the math, when you estimate this. And then add $300 for the shipping to the East Coast. So out of pocket, Action Van is going to cost you $27.64 for their base kit. The $175 is refundable when you return the core, the radius arm, and going back to Weldtec. Add $600, $4,600 out the door, out of pocket, and then the $500 is refundable when you ship back the core charge. So that's $4,600 versus $2,700. So that's the pricing right there. When you guys get hyped up about this hobby and let me know in the comments, it inspires me even more. So this video is Action Van versus Weldtec shipping to the East Coast edition. If I were to do it over again, I would have went with the Action Van lift because it's half the price and it's a comparable product to Weldtec. I don't regret my Weldtec lift, it's already in here. But another thing I would like to add is, since Weldtec bends the I-beams, the front track is sucked in a little bit. So when you look at an Action Van lifted van, even with stock rims, these are stock rims painted, but even with stock rims, the Action Van suspension, the tires stick out more, giving you more stability up front. And then Weldtec removes the sway bar. So that's one thing I don't like about Weldtec. Two things I don't like about Weldtec actually is the narrower front track and the removal of the sway bar. Action Van retains that, so it's a more stable ride on normal roads. And these vans will spend most of their time on normal roads. So yeah, if you're like me and money doesn't grow on trees, consider Action Van. Give them a call. Give Larry at Action Van a call. If you're a Weldtec super fan and their videos have inspired you, Weldtec inspired you to lift your van, then spend the extra $2,000 as a thank you to Weldtec. That's a great way to say thank you to Weldtec for inspiring you, spending the money with them instead of Action Van. But if you're like me, a couple years ago when I was tired of driving stock, if I had went with Action Van, I would have had a lift 6 months sooner, and I would have only had to drive this van for 6 months stock height versus a year if I had gone with Action Van. So like I said, I see a lot of comments saying it's Weldtec or nothing, hands down by far, and a lot of those guys are saying that have nothing. They're not driving with the lift kit because they rather have no lift than they rather have Weldtec or no lift. I think you guys rather have a lift, right? So just do your research on both companies. Give both companies a call. Hey, maybe you'll give your money to the guy who you vibe with more. Maybe you'll like the guy at Action Van more. Maybe you'll like the guy at Weldtec more. Just give them a call. I know for a lot of people, we really enjoy these vans, and we want to make these vans as cool as possible. These vans get us to cool places. We get to do some off-roading with them. It's a lot of fun. And I don't care what lift kit you guys get. I just want to see your vans lifted because I want your spirits lifted. If a four-wheel drive conversion is not in your budget, or you just don't want to spend that much for four-wheel drive, you just want to lift your two-wheel drive Econoline 5 inches, Action van suspension and Weldtec are your only choices, or maybe you could go to a custom off-road shop, get a kit fabricated. This is Camberg. They used to sell Econoline lift kits. They have one style left in stock. It looks like they're phasing out their Econoline lifts, but this lift right here for $34.85 to $4,100. It's an action van suspension style drop down lift bracket. So yeah, they have the action van style still. They used to sell a bent beam kit like Weldtec, but it's no longer for sale. So they do sell the drop down brackets out of their drop down bracket kit, and it's not cheap. It's $700, and that's why I have faith in both companies, both Action Van and Weldtec. Like I said, there hasn't been any reports on any of the kits breaking. Camberg used to sell both styles, bent I-beam and drop down bracket. Action Van sells drop down, Weldtec sells bent beam. Camberg did both. So like I said, I have faith in both companies. You can't make a flimsy drop down bracket. You just, you know, that's a big safety hazard if you build a flimsy drop down bracket. So that's why I have faith in both Action Van and Weldtec in terms of their quality. Our market is really small. The market for Econolines, we don't have many choices, so it's not like Jeep Wranglers and Toyota Tacomas. Manufacturers who make products for these vans, they have to be on point. Action Van suspension doesn't like bending I-beams. Weldtec doesn't like drop down brackets. Camberg sold both style of kits, bent I-beam and drop down brackets. Here's something interesting. Weldtec sells a lift kit for Quigley converted GM vans, and here's their method of lifting drop down brackets. How about GM vans? Here's a GM van. That's Action Van suspension site. Give them a call, see what they could do with GM vans. And here's the good news: if you want to go with Weldtec, their GM van lift kits are cheaper than the Econoline lift kits. The Econoline 5-inch lift is $3,200. So for the GM van, it's $2,844, and it looks like there's no core charge. Yeah, no core charge. And then, to make things better, if you have a GM van and you're wanting to lift your GM van, it looks like there's not much in the kit. Let's see. Where's a picture of the kit? Right there. So when you look at the kit itself, it looks like it won't come in a very big box. It's $600 to ship to the East Coast for the Econoline lift, because they modify the bend, or they modify the I-beams, they bend them. But hopefully the GM vans are a lot cheaper to ship, since it looks like the components are not as big as the Econoline components. So good news, if you're a GM van fan, the Weldtec lift is cheaper than the Econoline by like $400. And then Action Van looks like they could lift these GM vans. Give them a call. If you have a GM van and you happen to be watching this, you call Action Van up and get a quote. Let me know how much they quoted you at to lift a GM van. Weldtec, or Weldtec does it too. Action Van and Weldtec, they also work on the old body style Econolines, the brick nose. They're also able to lift those vans. Tony Lopez, leaving in the comments, how much did Weldtec and how much did Action Van suspension quote you at to lift your Class B brick nose camper van? Good morning. So where I slept last night, by the water, the river rapids. This is becoming one of my favorite hobbies, camping by the water. It's so nice waking up next to this. Here's my van. A little messy right now, but we just woke up.